Aloha! Welcome back to the Anxiety Coaches Podcast. I'm your host and coach, Gina Ryan, and I'm so happy to be with you again today as we consider the many ways to bring your mind and body back to its natural peace and calm. In today's episode, I'm talking about the mind's role in anxiety, your mind and my mind, and recognizing and changing thought patterns that we might have. Today, we're going to dive deeper into the anxiety-provoking thinking patterns that I know you've heard me talk about here and there. These are the ways that our minds can lead us into stress and worry. And more importantly, I want to talk about how we can shift these patterns for greater peace of mind. We don't have to stay stuck in that way of thinking. Have you ever caught yourself dreading an upcoming situation because you're convinced that the worst will happen? Or maybe you have a feeling that you know that a certain person is thinking something about you? These common thinking traps fuel anxiety, and today we're going to explore how to recognize and shift them, along with some other ones. So let's break down, first of all, some of the most common thinking patterns. Like I said, I know that I've talked about these before, but today I'm going to lay out, let's see how many I lined up here, 10 of them. So I thought it would be good to just open up with what are some of these anxiety-provoking thinking patterns. These are the common ones that can lead us to more worry and stress, not to mention anxiety. First up is fearing the worst and waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was a card-carrying member of that club back in my anxious days. I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. I couldn't even put a name or a situation onto what it was I was worrying about. It was just out there, waiting for something devastating to happen, fearing the worst. This is also known as catastrophizing, going from 0 to minus 60 in a second. You can assume the worst case scenario without any concrete evidence. And that's what I was doing. I had no concrete evidence. I couldn't even put my finger on exactly what it was. So whatever crossed my mind or my life, a situation, I would pin it on that. And that is that whole idea of waiting for the other shoe to drop. And the other part is fearing the worst. That's all we're doing. Whatever situation we're in or whatever issue is coming up or thing that we have to deal with or handle, it's not going to work out. It's going to be the worst possible outcome. We just get this planted in our brain and we often can't budge beyond it, but you can. And we'll get to that a little bit later in this episode. The second one I have is overgeneralizing. Now, this is assuming that because something has happened before, that it will always happen again. You'll notice that with a lot of these that I'm talking about, these mind states, these thinking patterns, what they are very rigid ways of being in the world. And that's what overgeneralizing is. It's assuming that because something happened once, that it will always happen again. And wait, it's not something good and exciting and fun that happened. No, we're always looking at the negative and we're stuck in that. And we're thinking if something negative happened once in a situation, it will always be like that again. One bad experience doesn't mean every similar situation will turn out the same way. But we know this, we even know this, and we get it. Intellectually, you understand this, but it is that primal part of your brain, that amygdala that is snapping on because you are on edge with your nervous system. You haven't calmed that amygdala down enough, but we can get there. So there's always hope. Number 3 is mind reading. You are convinced that you know what other people are thinking about you. Often you are assuming that they are judging you or disapproving of you, even though you have no real proof. This is very easy to fall into. Many people get into this and think that that's just the way life is. But we do not know what other people are thinking, and we are not the experts that we think we are of reading people's facial expressions or their body language. We think we can pick up all this, but we also want to question that, because if our amygdala is on alert, it is taking us down the negative path. It is not taking us down the rose path to a beautiful garden. It is taking us to fear, and that someone is going to either hurt us or disapprove of us, that they are judging us. And oftentimes, this is not only not true, but people aren't even noticing us. That is probably more the reality, is people are very busy with their own lives and their own thinking. Many people around us are as much in their heads as we are in ours. So mind reading is number 3. Let's move on to number 4. Fortune telling. This is insisting that you know exactly what will happen in the future. You have your crystal ball, and this crystal ball can only see negative outcomes. This is the anxious fortune telling. Anxiety loves certainty. And when we don't have certainty, our minds try to fill in the blanks. And what does it fill in the blanks with? The worst case predictions. This is what happens when you are holding that negative crystal ball. You are looking into the future and you are only seeing worst case predictions. Now, we can get away from this one too, because we, just like everyone else around us, do not know what the future will bring. We don't. We have no idea what's around every corner. And the best thing would be to at least think that it was a 50-50 chance that something good might happen. But no, the anxious mind, and again, for reasons of physiology, that our amygdala is on alert, it is trying to protect us, and it is telling us that there could be danger around that next corner. We don't have to live on such high alert. Our amygdala will come to our rescue when we need it, even after we have calmed our nervous system down. We don't need to train that to be on. It is there. The 5th one I have for you is negative self-talk. This happens. It happens, and we can be more aware of it. Constantly criticizing ourselves or using harsh words about yourself, this can erode confidence and increase stress. So we want to be on alert for this. We don't have to talk to ourselves in a negative way. There's so much negativity out in the world that we are able to pick it up easily and think, well, this is what we're hearing. This is what we're surrounded by. And when we add that to our already high alerted amygdala, which is trying to save us from anything, we are just adding more negativity and more negative self-talk. So I want you to be aware of this. Even notice today as you're going through your day if this is coming up for you. Because we think often, well, I'm kind of getting off track here, but we're going to go with it. We often think that if we hit ourselves with a stick rather than hold the carrot out in front of ourselves, that we will be better. If we call ourselves a name or we're hard on ourselves, that we won't make the same mistakes again. But the reality is what we're doing is exhausting ourselves. We're giving ourselves a lack of confidence. We're eroding the confidence that we had, and we're increasing our stress. And you cannot work to your best potential with those things going on. The best thing that we can do is to notice when we're being hard on ourselves and give ourselves a little self-compassion. Well, let me get back on track here with number 6, which is black and white thinking. Now, this is seeing situations in extremes. At the opposite ends of the poles, everything is either all good or all bad. There's no room for middle ground. And the reality is, life is full of gray areas. All of life is usually lived out between those two poles of good and bad, of black and white. So I want you to be able to find them, because that can be the key to reducing a lot of your anxiety. Things are not as definite and black and white as we make them out to be in our minds. And the more comfortable we can get with flowing in this middle area, the easier it is going to be for us to get through life more happily, with more joy, with more peace and calm. Number 7 is emotional reasoning. This is believing that because you feel something, it must be true. For example, I feel anxious, so this situation must be dangerous. Now, that is how a lot of us get trapped in anxious thinking. You once had a feeling in a situation, and that feeling was anxious. You were stressed. So your mind thinks that that situation must be dangerous. This is often how people get stuck with not wanting to drive anymore, not wanting to go in certain places anymore, or be around certain people anymore. They got anxious once in that situation, and they labeled it as dangerous, and that is what they believe. Now, that's emotional reasoning. It's believing that because you feel something, it must be true. Now, you could be feeling anxious for a multitude of reasons, and it doesn't always fit with how your amygdala is piecing this together. So we want to be aware of this. Now, number 8 are the should statements. Constantly thinking in terms of I should or I must, which creates internal pressure and feelings of failure when our expectations are not met. So we are thinking, I should do this, I must do that. We're always giving ourselves so much pressure, and this unbelievable to-do list for one day that we are labeling as the shoulds. This should get done today. I must get this done. This is so much pressure. And what that does is we end up with feelings of failure because we are often putting way too much on our plate, way too much on our to-do list or our internal should list. And what happens is we cannot meet those expectations, and we just continually feel bad about ourselves. So be careful of those should statements. Maybe you can turn it around, and maybe we'll talk about that as I finish up the list here. Number 9 is personalization and blame. That's assuming that you are responsible for things that are outside of your control, and actually blaming yourself for outcomes that may have had multiple factors. So when we are anxious, we tend to think that a lot of things that are going on in the world are because of something we did. We just have that over responsibility. I used to say I was acting like I was responsible for the price of tea in China. I thought inside of me, I knew intellectually that wasn't true. The world was not revolving around how I was being in the world, but my internal state was living like that. I felt that everything I did carried this huge responsibility and that things outside of my control were weighing on me, and that I was responsible for how those things turned out. And it's not true. And you really can move away from this also, because it's just a blame. Again, I think it probably came from a place of, again, the mind trying to protect me by taking care of things, being overly responsible, keeping everything happy and calm around me. But there is a place where that has to be let go, because we are not responsible for everything that is going on in the world around us. And the sooner that we can get out of that personalization and blame, the sooner we can begin to calm our nervous system down. Believe me, it's very true. And the final one is filtering. And this is focusing only on the negative aspects of a situation while ignoring the positive. This is wearing a negative filter, seeing everything through the negative bias. And a lot of things in life have good and bad. Situations that we're in, people that we know, can have positives and negatives, but when you're filtering, you're only seeing the negative. Now, I want to get to quickly here being able to shift some of these thinking patterns. Now that we've identified what some of them are, there are more, but we will continue to talk about these, because I think the more that you are reminded of these, the more you can make changes in your life. So the first thing that I want you to do to be able to shift some of these patterns is to recognize them and to label the thought pattern, because awareness is always our first step. When we notice an anxious thought, I want you to name it. Oh, that's my mind reading habit again, or something like that. This labeling can really help you from going and thinking that all of life is, this is just how life is, to no, this is a particular habit I have called mind reading. The second thing I want you to consider is doing something that is called catch and change up the all or nothing words. Catch them and change them. The all or nothing words. Instead of always or never, try being more general. Say sometimes or occasionally. This very small shift can help you see situations more clearly. Next up would be writing it down and challenging it. On the left side of the paper, write your anxious thought. On the right-hand side of the paper, list 3 reasons why it is not true. This exercise helps you to build evidence against your anxious belief, and it will serve you when you're out in the world. Believe me, you will take it off the paper. It will be in your mind, and you will begin to see reasons why a feeling or a thought is not true. Next up is to trace back your moods to your thoughts. If you're feeling down or anxious, pause and ask, what have I been thinking that led me here? Noticing this pattern can help you to break the cycle. Next, I want you to check where your thoughts fall on the love-fear continuum. Ask yourself, is this thought coming from a place of fear, or is it coming from compassion and love? Adjust accordingly to be kinder to yourself. Don't be so hard on yourself. Next up is the what if flip. If your anxiety creates a what if, which it does, I'm sure, and the worries such as what if I fail, practice flipping this. What if I succeed? Or what if everything works out? Flip it over to the complete opposite. It gives you more opportunity to see the world differently. Next up, gratitude anchoring. Of course, a podcast would not be complete without talking about gratitude. When negative thinking spirals, pause and name 3 things that you are grateful for. This will shift your brain's focus away from worry. And finally, visualization and mental rehearsal. Picture yourself handling a situation calmly and successfully, reinforcing a more positive mental pattern. We're not all good at visualization, but you can do the mental rehearsal. You can just think of yourself as handling a situation calmly and successfully. So with practice, this way of thinking will become more automatic. The more you bring awareness to your thoughts and offer yourself new and balanced alternatives, the more they become your new default. So as you go about your day, notice your thoughts on purpose, because it really matters. With time, your mind can become a more peaceful and supportive place. Until next time, take a breath and always have that longer, slower exhale for calming your mind and body. Be kind to yourself and keep moving forward one step at a time. And now for today's quote. Our anxiety does not come from thinking about the future, but from wanting to control it. And that's from Khalil Gibran. I'll be back in a few more days with another podcast. Until then, be well and aloha.